So, how do you even begin to defend a leader whose actions just seem to defy any kind of traditional political explanation? Well, a recent viral video says the answer isn't in politics at all. It's in theology. Today, we're going to unpack their pretty controversial claim, a theological defense of Donald Trump.
The whole entire argument really hangs on this one pretty provocative idea. The speakers in the video, they're not just suggesting a new political lens to look through. No, they're asking you to pretty much throw out the entire political playbook and pick up the Old Testament instead. It's a complete reframing of how to look at a modern leader.
Okay, so what in the world does it actually mean to be an Old Testament president? Well, this first part of their argument is really all about resetting our expectations of what a leader is even supposed to be.
This right here is the absolute core of it. The argument goes like this: stop judging him by the same standards you'd use for a typical politician. Instead, you're supposed to see him as a divinely appointed instrument. A tool, and a flawed one, maybe even a harsh one, but a tool being used for a very specific purpose. Kind of like all those imperfect, controversial figures God used in the Old Testament to carry out judgment.
And they get really specific about this. They compare him to King Cyrus, who was a secular king, a non-believer, who still ended up fulfilling God's plan. And also to Jehu, who was this loud, unapologetic leader tasked with tearing down what they call the Jezebel spirit, which is a biblical reference to corruption and false ideology. Now for them, these are not just clever metaphors, they see them as direct historical parallels.
But for this whole idea of a divinely appointed instrument to make any sense, you first have to understand the theological bedrock it's all built on, and that's the doctrine of divine sovereignty.
This is the crucial part. In this worldview, nothing happens by accident. Every leader, it doesn't matter if it's Obama or Biden or Trump, is in power because God explicitly put them there for a specific reason. There's no such thing as a political leader just slipping through the cracks.
And this quote really drives that point home. It's a direct application of a biblical proverb to a modern leader. The argument they're making is that a leader's decisions and their actions are ultimately being guided by a higher power, which makes him, in their words, God's trump.
And to back this up, they argue this isn't some new concept at all. They point to figures like Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar. These were basically the antagonists in the biblical story, as proof that God has a long, long history of using flawed and even hostile leaders to achieve his ultimate goals.
So, how do they see all this theology playing out today? Well, the next section of their argument focuses on what they see as tangible, real-world evidence of this divine action.
The speakers bring up two main examples. First, they talk about a military operation in Nigeria to protect Christians, and they claim it led to people literally dancing in the streets. Second, they point to an operation to capture the Venezuelan president, which they say caused the people of Venezuela to rejoice. In their view, these are not just foreign policy moves. These are modern-day acts of divine judgment. And they draw a really sharp contrast here. They frame the previous administration's approach, putting a financial bounty on someone's head, as passive and ineffective. But in their narrative, the surgically precise extraction was direct, it was decisive, and it's the kind of action that fits their model of a leader being used for judgment.
Now, as you can imagine, this way of looking at a political leader invites a lot of criticism. So, how do the speakers in the video deal with people who disagree?
Well, their answer is basically that the criticism isn't based on a valid political disagreement. No, they say it's actually a spiritual failing. Critics, they argue, are either just driven by emotion, or they're unfairly expecting a perfect leader, or, and this is a big one, they just don't know their Bible well enough to see what's really going on.
This quote is such a memorable summary of their whole rebuttal. It's a reference to a Bible story where God speaks through a donkey. And their point is pretty simple. If God can use a humble animal for his purposes, then the flaws you see in any human leader are completely irrelevant to his ability to use them.
They push this idea even further by talking about a duality in God's nature. They argue that critics are wrongly looking for the gentle lamb, the one that represents meekness and grace. But they believe we're in a time that calls for the Lion of Judea, a symbol of power and judgment and righteous anger. It's their way of saying the tool has to match the job.
So all of this, it's all building towards their final, ultimate conclusion. It's a call for believers to radically shift their entire perspective on politics.
At the end of the day, their entire argument is designed to get people to stop analyzing the politician and just start trusting in divine providence. It's a call to look past all the political theater and see a much grander, spiritual plan at work.
This quote really just encapsulates their whole message, doesn't it? It's a direct command to redirect your focus away from the earthly leader and towards the heavenly authority that they believe is truly in control.
So in the end, this entire theological framework is really designed to shift the conversation away from political science and character analysis. It argues that a leader's flaws, their policies, all that is secondary to the divine purpose they are believed to be serving. And it leaves us with a pretty fundamental question. What does this reveal about their view of faith in public life when the actions of a leader are seen not as their own, but as an act of God?